Hello, Gustavo.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Just a little intro. When we were organizing this event, and actually it was kind of special for us, we said that we want to have a special guest. Not only for us, but for you, because frankly speaking, all our colleagues in Kogi are heavy readers and watchers of Gustavo books and frameworks and videos. Frankly speaking, he was the first who came to our mind when we were discussing who is supposed to be the guest. Because for me, really, Gustavo is the guru of company culture and in many cases has been, let's say, the idol or the way how we want to do our business. So please welcome Gustavo online here in Prague at Hotel Angelo. So, Gustavo, why do you believe that company culture is such an important business topic for CEOs and senior managers? Because when I see, and unfortunately you can't, but when I see the audience here, majority of our guests are really representing here either the CEOs or senior managers. So if you can give your thoughts on that one, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things. First of all, I want to once again welcome everybody, and I want to congratulate Koji for the anniversary. And why I'm saying this, not just to look polite and grateful. I've been in your city, in Prague, a couple of years ago, lovely place. But you guys got where we are. You're celebrating your anniversary because of the culture, not just because you're smart. So I want to use that to get started, that culture is what brings people together or sets them apart. People always, and leaders talk that culture is hard to grasp. They say culture, maybe it's invisible, it's difficult to put into words. The point is, it's invisible when it's working. When you are in a team or in a company where the culture is really performing well, people don't realize the culture because it happens naturally. However, when it's not working, when you have problem, then it becomes visible for the wrong reasons. So why leaders are so interested in culture? Because they know that it drives behavior. 90% of senior executives, from CEOs, senior leaders, say that culture is one of the top 3 priorities, and they know they need to get it right in order to succeed. However, and we're going to speak later about that, many leaders don't know how to improve their culture. They know, hey, culture matters, but then what can I do about it? When it comes to employees, of course, you want to recruit the best talent. Over 80% of people across the world said that if the culture of the company in which they're working doesn't match what they want, they might be looking for another job. So the saying is, people don't quit jobs, they quit cultures. So when they're not happy in the place, they move somewhere else. And lastly, when it comes to innovation, Boston Consulting Group shows that organizations that are able to develop a culture that promotes risk-taking, experimentation, are 60% more, potentially more likely to be innovative and separate from the rest. So definitely the culture plays a huge role. It changes how people connect with the organization, it changes business performance, and of course it improves innovation. The point is, what do we mean by culture? Because people have different interpretation of what culture really means.
Thank you very much. Let's continue, because in many cases, Central and Western Europe is somehow following what's happening in the US. So do you see any, trends, any specifics which are happening at States and in your experience might be influencing the situation here in Central Europe?
Definitely. Just to give you background, I work a lot in North America, but we also have clients across Europe and across New Zealand, Australia, Latin America. So we get to see different companies, different sizes across different regions. Although each region have their peculiarities, we're seeing, to a point, certain trends. One of the trends is the culture style. Many organizations come from a very top-down, very rigid kind of approach, a very bureaucratic, whatever. And we know that many companies are wanting to become more open, more transparent. So they have moved the pendulum from an extreme, very controlling to becoming very loose, what we call tribal companies, in which they care too much about people. They call it people first, but in the end, they move from having very goal-driven cultures to a more loose culture. So now we're seeing companies trying to find the balance. Because if we try to please the business, but then not people, it's not good. But if you only try to please people and everyone gets along, so we get them ping-pong tables and free food and stuff to please them, then we're losing a little bit where we're here. We're not just a group of friends. It's okay, we're friends, but we're here to do great work. So now in that, finding that balance, we see two consequences. Either companies that are moving back into very aggressive models, very aggressive cultures, very harsh, very cold, or companies that are bringing the best of both worlds and becoming more fearless, more innovative. That's a macro trend. Now, if we see another lens, which is a remote work or hybrid work, we are seeing how this pendulum is affecting that. So there are companies that are betting on employees, giving them a lot of freedom. They bet and trust employees that they're going to become innovative and they're going to take the right choices. Take, for example, Airbnb or Spotify or Allstate. They have instituted anywhere, anytime policies. So not only they allow people to work from wherever they want, but whenever they want. So people can say, I'd like to work from 6 a.m. to 12 and then take a break. So that flexibility. That flexibility has, contrary to what many people believe, has helped them. For example, Airbnb has increased its revenue by 40%. Now 21% of people that are new hires come from minority groups, and they have promoted a lot of women in senior positions. So that has allowed to improve the culture. The other side of the spectrum, we have Amazon, or we have Twitter, X now, that basically are adopting very aggressive policies. They are forcing people to return to work. And what's happening is that they say that this is because of the culture, because of belonging, because of connection. But actually, those companies are going through a lot of painful, very negative business results. And they're covering that. So Amazon is forcing people, in order for, let's say, 15% of those saying, hey, I don't want to go back to the office, and quit, so they get rid of people without having to quit. This is a trend that's happening. I'm not saying it's one that you should adopt, but it's important to take in consideration. Once again, freedom, trust on one hand, and very controlling, very aggressive on the other. Then another thing that's getting really a lot of attention is that many startups, I'm not from small to startups that are now like large companies, are getting back to a more controlling environment. Mm-hmm. So they're getting back to what they call the founder mode, in which the founder now wants to get much more involved, have a more hands approach in key decisions, in how the business runs on day to day. So in the past, once a startup got to a certain scale, certain volume, the founder focusing more on the long-term vision. Now many founders are getting back into, I'm going to be more controlling, I'm going to get more hands-on. Because of that, many large organizations or medium-sized businesses are following and say, hey, if startups are getting more hands-on, I'm going to get more controlling. So we're seeing that in Australia, we see that in Canada, we see it in the US, and in some countries in Europe as well, that's starting to show.
Yeah. Shall I interrupt you? Because that's
of course, yeah, interrupt me.
Yeah, because I do see that as a trend, So on one side, control, on the second side, freedom. But do you see, is there any general formula which is gonna solve the issue, or it's always valid specifically towards the particular situation in the company?
It's an interesting thing that we need to understand leadership. So because leadership and culture go hand in hand, I know we're going to talk about that later, but the point is the leadership model in the past was the leader was the superhero and was basically leaders did everything. And if the company went well, it was because of them. Now we're seeing, leaders should be more like a servant leaders, a lead from the back. Research shows that effective leaders need to play both roles, right? So there's a moment in which you need to take action, you need to take the lead, and there's a moment that you need to step back. So it's not one or the other. So to your point, I think that rather than choose one model, we need to see in which model it makes sense. So for example, when Airbnb went through the pandemic and we know people stopped traveling, so their business kind of tanked dramatically, the executive team took total control of decision making. They flattened the structure. When business regained normalcy, they step back and they do that. So I think that answering your question, it depends on the context. So you need to adapt, but rather than be 100% one or the other.
Yeah, got you. The second question, which goes more to your previous experiences, and that's basically whether you see any best practices which you would recommend across the business, and which you've seen in the past working,
Yeah, definitely. So the practice are about what are we trying to create. So for example, a big level, we are seeing, and that's good for us because that's what we do for a living, that companies are becoming more intentional about their culture. So as I mentioned earlier, many leaders understood that culture mattered, but didn't necessarily spend time talking about culture. Usually it was something that they asked HR, hey, take care of the culture, and that's it. Now leaders realize that they need to be involved. They need to be involved in understanding where we are, what's working, what's not working, and then design the future state. So a couple of best practices. We know that feedback is a critical tool. It's one of the key elements to building an innovation culture. It helps us improve not only at an individual level, but also a collective level. However, most companies treat feedback like a weapon. They use it to criticize people. People don't want to receive feedback. They shut down. So one shift to kind of change that is to create a culture in which leaders request feedback. Okay? So instead of leaders giving feedback to their teams, Patagonia, for example, trained their managers to always ask for feedback. What about this decision? How do you manage that meeting? So when the leader is open and asks for feedback, first it's seen as, oh, he's human, he or she's human, they want to learn, but also that models the behavior and other people want to ask for feedback. So it creates a feedback culture, like a rippling effect. Another best practice is using storytelling. So in order to connect with people, we need to use storytelling to talk about culture. So the consulting firm KPMG, basically it's an accounting firm. No offense for anyone in the room if you do something related, but it's a number crunching, let's say boring, whatever. And that's how employees felt. Yeah, you're going to shut me down. So that's how people felt about their jobs. So their leaders started asking people for stories. Don't tell me what you do in a week, on a monthly basis. Tell me what clients you're working for. Tell me what's the impact. Tell me what's the ultimate impact of your work. And by doing that, they start realizing that certain projects that the consulting firm did basically was helping restore democracy in certain countries. They were helping farmers in the US rebuild their businesses. They were fighting terrorism. They were certifying the election of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. So that connected people through storytelling to a deeper purpose. And then people start thinking, hey, not only my job is not boring, but hey, I'm going to brag with my colleagues about what I do, right? So it shifted the mindset completely. And the last best practice is if you want to drive a culture change, you need to get people to support you, right? Many companies fail to get more than 5% of people involved in the process. And so they actually 2%, according to stats, so they fail. Leaders alone cannot transform a culture. You need more people. However, in the past, we understood that 25% was the magical number. Once you convince 25% of your employees, the rest will follow. Recent research by McKinsey shows that, very good news, you only need to convince 7% of your employees. So you have 100 employees, convince 7, make sure they're the right ones, and they're going to help you move the culture in the right direction. Okay. So that number, it's critical. It's a best practice. Aim for that. What's the threshold to turn your culture into something much better?
Okay, so summarizing, feedback, storytelling, and influencing the ambassadors actually in the positive way. Super.
Yeah. And feedback, to your point, it's asking for feedback rather than giving, no? So modeling, asking.
Okay, asking for feedback. Super. The transformation, the culture transformation is not an easy project. It's not the stuff which is happening for a month. And of course, in such a transformation, the mistakes are happening. And in your experience, and I'm talking especially about not the ad hoc stuff, but about those who are occurring repeatedly, which are the biggest mistakes which your clients or the colleagues you've seen are doing, what we should avoid?
Okay, I have some points here, so I have a lot, so feel free to interrupt me in the middle so we can do it, so I don't get me talking. There are many mistakes. Some are more strategic, some are easier to fix. One of the most prominent mistakes that leaders do, regardless if you're a 5 employee company, 1,000 or a 200 employee company, is that they confuse the culture they wish they have with the culture they actually have. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot separate one from the other, you're not going to be able to define the future. So the first critical step is understand how people experience the culture, not yourself, not your executive team, but the larger employee base. Mm-hmm. Another mistake is treating culture as a one-off activity. We're going to do a culture initiative. We launch it, it lasts 3 months, 6 months, and we're gone. Culture requires working continuously. The same way you work on strategy, you need to work on culture continually. One minor thing, which is language, but people respond to language. We recommend using the word evolution, so culture evolution rather than culture change. First, people hate change, right? They resist it because we are who we are. Second, the word change is loaded. If you work in different companies and your leader comes and say, hey, we're going to do a change transformation initiative, or another, right? So it doesn't come good. But also the most important thing is change is like, it seems that we're going to forget about everything we did and we're going to start from scratch. We're going to change everything. Okay. And people need recognition. So evolution requires to understand, hey, we acknowledge the good, what we achieve. We're going to keep certain things and other things we might throw away or change, but we are keeping, so it doesn't feel that we're transforming the culture. People need some sort of continuity in there. Super. I'm going to pause a second. I have more topics to that question if you want to.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I understand basically to keep going and be careful about the language you are using, if I'm really simplifying what you just said. Okay. We call Chief Culture Officer the person who is leading the company, the CEO. What would how important would you see the role of the top management and especially the CEO in such a transformation?
The role is critical for 2 reasons, because the leader of the company owns culture, but it doesn't own the culture. So it owns culture as a responsibility. So if the culture is not working, that's a CEO's responsibility. And if it's working, that's a CEO's accomplishment. However, they don't own it in the sense that culture is co-created. So I used to imagine that in Prague, I mean, the mayor determines which streets are for biking or walking or avenues with 2-way streets, whatever that is. And that's part of the role, defining that system. However, if people are going to walk, the cars they drive, the music they hear, how they dress, all that stuff that adds to your culture as a city, that's on people. So finding that balance. So what exactly are the minimum rules that you need to define, right? Because if you don't have traffic lights, people can crash. So you need to have some clarity, but also in which moment you're going to let people choose. So for example, the purpose, the values, the behaviors that we expect, those should come from the leaders. But then how we make decisions, how we give feedback to each other, team rituals, how we manage meetings. We need to listen to our teams and let them come with the best ideas, because probably they're going to come with better ideas than the leaders.
Okay, so again, if I'm summarizing, you are saying that the strategy, the culture shift strategy needs to be defined by the leaders, but the execution, let people participate actually. Super. Few more questions from the audience, if I should. Mm-hmm. The first is basically, how would you see the AI trend coming to the real lives of people being the element which will influence the company culture?
Yeah, it's a great way. So I like to think of AI and suggest my clients to think of AI as another team member, in the sense that we involve it in the collaboration process. But we're seeing two things, and once again, it has to do with the type of culture you want. One is leaders are pushing people to adopt AI because it's coming, it has a lot of benefits, and everyone wants to be leading the change. But on the other hand, many people feel afraid of sharing that they're using too much AI. Because if you're using AI to write a report, then your boss is going to say, well, you're not working, or actually you're not doing your job, or I need AI, I don't need you. So this attention that's happening, the pressure to let's use AI, but people are using it behind the scenes. The second thing that we're seeing is people are trusting AI more than they're trusting their colleagues. So there are leaders that are saying, hey, I'm brainstorming with my chatbot and I'm getting better ideas that I get with my executive team. So that's a problem, because if that continues to happen, first, instead of collaboration, we're going to see isolation. People are going to collaborate or work with AI alone versus with their team members. But also, we know that AI has a lot of benefits, but still, most of the solutions that you get are the same solutions that someone else is going to get using the AI asking similar prompts. So overall, we're seeing that it's saving time, but it's also lowering the quality of the conversations and the quality of the ideas and the quality of the outcomes.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question which is coming from the audience is not about the strategy, but it's about the implementation. So do you have any recommendation or the standards which you would recommend regarding the implementation phase? How to make the change, how to change the behavior of people?
Yeah, behaviors of people. So people don't like to be changed by others, right? So they need to own change. When they feel that change it's imposed, research shows that people are going to shut down. That's why over 70% of culture transformation, according to McKinsey, globally fail. So we need to involve people, but also we need to adopt an experimental mindset. So one of the reasons many culture change fail, it's because leaders want to change everything at once. So instead of trying to change everything and confuse people, choose what are the one or two things that we want to start doing differently, right? What things can we adopt? Test it, see how it happens, adjust. And once people say, okay, it's working, come with something else. But don't try to change how you design meetings, how you make decisions, how you practice feedback, how to build psychological safety all at once, because it's going to fail and people are going to get confused. The other element about driving change, there are 3 Ds that you need to keep in mind. One is defining very clearly the culture you want to build. That's defined. Then comes demonstrate. You as a leader, how are you going to commit to show up differently to demonstrate the culture you want people to embrace? So if you're changing, let's say you want a culture of innovation, well, you need to start taking risks. You need to acknowledge your own mistakes. You need to give people budget or time to innovate and be patient, because innovation takes time. On the other hand, you need to be clear, what do you demand? That's the 3rd D. What are the expectations? What you reward and punish from people? So it's define, demonstrate, demand.
Okay, thank you very much. 2 more questions, if I may. The one is personal, so let's start with this one, okay, if I may. The question is from the audience. What inspired you to basically begin focusing on company culture as a key topic in your work?
I could tell you a beautiful story, or I can tell you the truth and say frustration.
We like the real
Why?
stories today, actually, not the marketing.
No,
stories.
I know. I'm just teasing and I'm preparing, setting up the stage. The point is that I used to work in the marketing communication world for a couple of, let's say, 3 decades or more. And I was a CEO, I was running different operations and getting frustrated by how culture got in the, for example, we came up with great solutions, great ideas for clients, but then there was fear, there was bureaucracy, and then nothing changed. No, so out of that, I say, well, it seems that organizations have more ideas that they need, but what they need is an accelerator, that conducive culture that's going to drive into that. Despite that, I mean, I always been hired for businesses that weren't doing well. So I had to turn them around from a business, but most important from a culture. So I got that experience firsthand, and that was drove me to do the work I do.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, because food is already getting, hopefully not cold, but people are getting hungry. So please, the last one is basically, in your experience, because you've been facing a lot of projects actually across the world, is there any specific roles relating to the nationality in a culture transformation, or you see that the people are behaving the same?
There are nuances for sure. However, what I'm seeing is there are many problems that are happening across different countries, different regions. And when people share those, they always say, well, this is because I'm Mexican. This is because I'm from Belgium. This is because I'm from Japan. And I'm seeing, well, but I hear people from all over the world telling me exactly, no, I'm from India. So I'm not saying local culture it does play a huge role, but it's not as important as it used to be in the past. We're all consuming news, movies, books. Like the world is becoming more and more crossover. So we're seeing many issues that are getting closer across borders, if you know what I mean.
Okay. Thank you very much for open discussion and open answers. Please, guys, thanks to Gustavo for participating.
Thank you.